crowd on and a nice crowd in person. I think we've become friends in here, so there's a lot of socializing. This is good. We miss those who can't be here with us in person, but we are thankful for Zoom no matter. So welcome, everyone. I'm Millie. I think you all know that. And just a few announcements. We will meet next spring break. It is Cobb County's spring break, but Jeffrey wants to carry on. And I think we'll probably go to about April 18th or so. I don't know if I have the right date, but 2 or 3 more weeks. So he'll let you know that. But we will be meeting next week and in person. Johnson Ferry is offering this room for us. So that will be good. And Jeffrey sent me a notice today that Ron DeSantis is going to be in town tomorrow. You do need a ticket. Jeffrey will tell you a little bit more, and he has information. The tickets might be free, but you do have to have a ticket to get in, I understand. They're free, but you have to have, Jeffrey will tell you where, and it is in Cobb County, I believe.
Yeah, it's at Outdoor Adventures over on South Cobb Drive in Smyrna.
That's right by my house.
Yes.
It's at 1:30, Janet. I don't know if you can get out of school or not.
No, shoot.
So anyway, he has all the information if anybody's interested in how to get a ticket. So just email him and let him know that, and he'll send you that. Jeffrey is going to be starting a Christian history class at Mount Bethel. It is not the Monday immediately after Easter, but the following Monday, and it will be a 5-week class. And we'll let you know more details about that. We look forward to having Jeffrey at Mount Bethel, and anybody that's interested can certainly join in as well. And next Thursday, this is also spring break week, Reasons to Believe will be meeting also in person here right across the hall. And Eric Smith will be our guest speaker, presenter. Eric does a great job. So if you can join us for that, or it will also be on Zoom. Just let myself or Jeffrey know. We have that information. Certainly interesting times. Oh my, as I think Francis Schaefer said, or I've heard Jeffrey say it, and this is sort of my motto: I am not optimistic, but my hope is in Jesus, and come quickly in this troubled world. So I know anyone who's paying attention should feel that way, because oh my, Jeffrey might have more to say, but I have asked Emily if she would open us in prayer tonight, and we will get started.
Do I need to stand? Yes, sir.
Yeah, just thank you. Okay.
I had, dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your great love for us. Thank you for your mercy. Thank you for your greatest sacrifice for sending your son, Jesus, to die a horrible death on the cross for us and for our sins. Lord, I just thank you for this class and for our eyes being open to ways that we can share the good news of the gospel to others that may not see things the same way we do. I just pray tonight that you would go before us and go before Jeffrey and his teaching, that you would give him his words and through your Holy Spirit. And Lord, I pray that anything that's not of you would fall off of our ears, and that everything that's of you would just penetrate deep into our hearts. We love you so much. We pray this all in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Well, good evening, and Millie, thank you for the announcements. Emily, for your opening prayer, and good to see those of you who are joining us online. And very much looking forward to continuing our Socratic dialogues for this evening. We'll be doing dialogue number 3, by the way, so hopefully you have that printed out and can follow along. That'll make it considerably more, I think, impactful for you. Well, I think many of us have really been shaken by the events of a couple of days ago. The murders that took place at the Christian school there in Nashville. And just heartbreaking. So let's, many of you, I think probably most of you got an email that I sent out earlier today with a little bit of information on that. So let's be sure to hold those people up in prayer. And it reminded me of a song that was very meaningful to me years ago. This is a song by David Wilcox. Some of you may be familiar with him. He was popular in the 1990s. And his song in particular, I think is probably his best known song, was called Show the Way. And I'd like to play it for you. But since you don't have the lyrics right there in front of you, let me read the lyrics and then we'll play the song. And I think that'll make it all the more meaningful and impactful. And it starts out this way. You say you see no hope. You say you see no reason we should dream that the world would ever change. You say that love is foolish to believe, because there'll always be some crazy with an army or a knife or an airplane or a gun to wake you from your daydream and put the fear back into your life. Look, if someone wrote a play just to glorify what's stronger than hate, would they not arrange the stage to look as if the hero came too late? He's almost in defeat. It's looking like the evil side will win. So on the edge of every seat, from the moment that the whole thing begins, it is love who mixed the mortar, and it's love who stacked these stones. You notice he wrote, it's love who, not love that. It is love who mixed the mortar. It's love who stacked these stones, and it's love who made the stage here, although it looks like we're alone. In this scene set in shadows like the night is here to stay, there is evil. Cast around us, but it's love that wrote the play. For in this darkness, love can show the way. Now the stage is set. You can feel your own heart beating in your chest. This life's not over yet, at least for most of us. So we get up on our feet and do our best. We play against the fear. We play against the reasons not to try. We're playing for the tears burning in the happy angel's eyes. For it's love who mixed the mortar, and it's love who stacked these stones, and it's love who made the stage here, though it looks like we're alone. In this scene set in shadows like the night is here to stay, there's evil cast around us, but it's love who wrote the play. For in this darkness, love will show the way. So very meaningful song. I hope you find it to be such. And let me play it here for you. And it looks like evil in the world will absolutely dominate and triumph. But in the end, Jesus will return and he will conquer all of that. And at least in the life of our country, I don't believe things have ever been so dark. And so let's really be mindful that each day we need to live it to the fullest, to honor God and to serve others and to be a source of light and love and hope and truth in the midst of a world that really values none of that.
Jeffrey, I think world journalism has done a very good job covering everything. You agree, Jennifer? And they just sent out a special thing this afternoon, but they have two of their top reporters there. And actually one of their, I think she's one of the not a reporter, she's brings the news, actually goes to that church.
Oh.
So she had, was it Emily Whitten? Yeah. So it's just like a very personal, they've really taken great.
That's wonderful. And by the way, Dolly has a few copies of something I sent out by email earlier today. If you'll pass those out, just kind of spread them around a little bit. And in particular, it highlights the pastor of the church there, the Presbyterian church there. And you'll see in the photograph there, his little girl, and she was one of the three who was murdered the other day.
Apparently, the shooter, Stanley, went to a church that Jim and Janine's son and daughter-in-law attend, and her mother had taught Sunday school, and it was like they were at wit's end of what to do with her and help her. And then, I don't know all the details of that, but there was a connection. So just that,
Yes.
family and community, just, I just feel Satan is alive and well,
Absolutely,
infiltrating everything. and,
absolutely. Mhm.
Can't even get help for these
So-
people because, God forbid, she was even at a counselor or whatever. You can't do that anymore.
What a time, oh, please go
No,
ahead.
and anyway, in this crazy world.
Yeah, what a time to go back and reread the book of Revelation, but read it quickly. Read it quickly because it's so easy. And this is the tendency to get bogged down in all the minutia and details. Read it quickly. We saw Tom Key, who had memorized the entire book of Revelation, do a stage presentation many, many years ago. And as much as we had studied and read about the book of Revelation, just hearing him do it in, I guess it was an hour and a half or 2 hours, all of a sudden it dawns on me what an incredibly beautiful story it is, without again getting bogged down in all the little details and everything. So that's why I say, take some time, go back, read the book of Revelation, and read it like you were reading a novel or something. And what a beautiful book. Evil is cast around us, but it's God who wrote the play, actually. Bruce? Yeah.
I heard on the news this afternoon that there was a 61-year-old African American janitor who was killed.
Yes.
And he left 7 children and 14 grandchildren. But they started a GoFundMe page and everybody collected $400,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he was very much loved and respected there. And then there was a substitute teacher as well, along with the 3 children. Oh, my. Okay, well, God has spared our lives for a purpose in this evil and violent world. So we're here right now for a purpose. So let's maximize the opportunity and serve him wholeheartedly. All right, now what I'd like to do this evening is move on to dialogue number 3. I realize we didn't finish dialogue number 2. We've actually been running behind for several sessions now. So I wanted to make up some lost time, and hopefully we can get back on track. But before we move on into dialogue number 3, let me go back to 1 and 2 and just highlight a few key points. And by the way, in another week or so, I'll send out these highlights to you so you can keep them. Because again, there's so much dialogue going on in these encounters, and there's a lot of humor and a lot of aside comments and so on. So it's good to kind of focus on the main points. So in dialogue number 1, we start with some preliminary principles for any kind of engagement with another person. And the first rule is essentially we must seek clarity before we seek agreement. In other words, we need to clearly define any terms, any words, any concepts that are vague or ambiguous. Otherwise, you can't have a meaningful exchange with someone if you're using the same words and concepts in different ways. And then, of course, the highlight here is on the contrast between objectivity and subjectivity. Objectivity is something that is real or true, regardless of whether you've experienced it, whether or not you acknowledge it, whether or not you even agree with it. It is independent of human thought and independent of human action. So it's objective. Subjective, obviously, just the opposite. Subjective is something is real or true. It's the idea that something is real and true only if I like it, only if I agree with it, or only if it correlates to my society and culture and so on. In other words, subjectivity is all about that it's dependent upon human thought and human actions. Now, you remember in the first dialogue, Paula Postman put forth 7 arguments for moral relativism. And first of all, she said that morality is subjective because individuals and cultures have different values. Well, yeah, of course. But in fact, as Socrates points out, different cultures generally agree on moral principles, although they differ on the application of the principles. This is similar to the relationship between meaning and expression. In the past, societies absolutized relativities. They absolutize things that frankly are just relative. But our society attempts to relativize, our society attempts to relativize absolutes. Okay, we don't want to believe that anything is divinely sanctioned and absolutely true. We want to keep our options open so as to fulfill our own agenda in life. Now, the second argument that Paula put forth is that morality cannot be objective because after all, we are all conditioned by our society and culture. Well, and again, Socrates points out, well, yeah, we're all influenced by our society and culture, but to say that we're conditioned by our society and culture doesn't mean that our society and culture determines what we believe. We still have free will, and we need to exercise that in keeping with our understanding of biblical principles. Now, the third argument she put forth is that subjectivism is better than absolutism because subjectivism leads to tolerance, whereas objectivism leads to dogmatism and intolerance and attempts to force your values on other people. Now, you hear this argument a lot. And Socrates will respond by saying, well, look, true moral laws, natural moral laws, and those values are not my values. They're absolute and they're universal values. So I'm not trying to force my views on anybody. I'm merely acknowledging in all humility that certain things are right and wrong, true and untrue. So if truth were only subjective, why would we even care about anything? Why would it matter? Why would we ever argue about anything? So nobody is absolutely a moral relativist. Just insult them. And immediately they'll respond as if you've said something inappropriate. And they would be correct, of course, in that sense. But what it does is show them that, no, there's things that they believe are absolutely right and wrong. And so their relativism collapses at that time. And by the way, if the idea of tolerance actually presupposes that there are certain absolute truths. Otherwise, the term tolerance, which is so misused these days, tolerance has no meaning outside of the concept of absolute objective truth. In other words, what we tolerate is error, okay? But people want to, again, totally change the meaning of it to mean that if we disagree on a basic moral principle, then we should not only accept, but perhaps even celebrate their view. And no, I mean, our principles are guided by Scripture, the clear teachings of Scripture. Now, fourthly, Paula made the point that morality is really just a matter of motives, which are themselves subjective. And Socrates responds, well, although motives are important, they are only one component of morality. morality also requires proper deeds or proper actions as well. Well, fifthly, Paula will say that morality is situational, and situational means that morality is relative. But Socrates points out, look, situations are objectively real. And so even if morality were determined by situations alone, it would still be objective. And here he brings up Thomas Aquinas's moral trinity, and that is, for something to be true or moral, there's the act itself, which has to be good. There has to be the motive behind the act, which is good. And the situation has to be appropriate for it. So you have the act, the motive, and the situation. And for something to be truly good, moral, all those conditions have to be met. Well, then Paula, who was rapidly running out of gas at this point, says, well, morality is in our subjective motives, not in objective facts. Acts themselves can't be evil, but that takes us back to a previous point that Socrates and Thomas Aquinas had already argued about the moral trinity. And then lastly, she wanted to argue that objective values would mean that we're not free moral creatures. But again, that issue has already been addressed as well. Our lives are not strictly determined by anybody or any culture or society in which we live. And but we have to choose, and God does not violate our free will. Objective values align with reality. They are absolute moral truths. So that was dialogue number one. Now, dialogue number two, and I'll be very brief about this. This is Socrates on comparative religions. We read about halfway through this last week. And then for time's sake, we had to suspend it, and I'd like to move on. But here are some major points. First of all, Paula brings up the issue that she likes to consider herself very open-minded. And Socrates points out, look, the only reason to be open-minded about anything is to seek truth. Otherwise, you're just playing silly games, okay? A lot of people do that. And then the issue comes up, well, what are we talking about here? What is truth? And as we've reiterated in the past, truth is that which corresponds to reality. So those who argue that there is no truth, that's tantamount to saying there is no reality. And nobody believes that unless they're in the midst of a, I don't know, LSD trip or something like that. Then the differences in religions come up. And Socrates, are all religions, are they all more or less equal? Do they all pretty much lead us to the same objective, which is God, however we want to imagine godness being? And Socrates says, well, look, these religions are all very different. For instance, you have those religions that believe in many gods, and then you have those that believe in just one God, okay? And so there's a contradiction between them. Furthermore, is God personal or is he an impersonal force? Again, you have the religions disagreeing on that. And then lastly, and probably as significant as anything, was Jesus Christ divine, and was he the divine savior of humanity? Well, there's only one religion that says he was, and that's Christianity. All the others say no, he was not. So are all religions equally valid? Well, if all religions were just man-made, they would not necessarily be equally valid still, but none would be the absolute truth. But if one religion were not man-made, but instead was divinely inspired, it would be the absolute truth, and therefore it would be superior to all the others. Socrates puts it this way: how would we know that all religions are paths to the mountaintop unless we had a perspective from the mountaintop? Okay. Otherwise, we're just kind of groping in the dark, aren't we? He goes on to say, if religion is God's invention rather than ours, then it would make sense that there would be only one road, and that would be the one that's been revealed by God himself. If God made a road, a path to the summit of the mountain, it's not arrogant to accept this one road. And in fact, it would be just the opposite of arrogance. It would be an exercise in very great humility. He turns to the claims of Christ. Jesus claimed to be the exclusive way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And again, the point is, who would say something like that? I mean, that is unbelievably arrogant, unless it's true. Okay, unless it's true. So Christianity is a religion of love. It's also a religion of truth. And the two are inseparable if we understand love properly and truth properly. And then lastly, they address the issue of sincerity. And, isn't it good enough just to be sincere? We're all very fallible human beings. So, let's try to do the best we can. And I'm sure God's not going to punish anybody, if we've taken an alternate path or whatever. But the point to be emphasized here, and it's one of the key points in the entire dialogue, and that is that, yes, sincerity is a virtue, and sincerity is absolutely essential, but it's not sufficient. In other words, we can be sincerely wrong. People are sincerely wrong all the time. Socrates puts it this way: true sincerity yearns to know the truth. So the person who's truly sincere is not just playing games and trying to cover for their lifestyle or anything like that. They honestly are pursuing the things of God. Different spiritual paths can lead to two different destinations, either to God or away from God. So that's the last point that he makes in dialogue number 2. All right, so with that, let's move on to Socrates on Christology, the nature of Jesus Christ. And for this, this dialogue actually, just like the previous two, only incorporates, let's see, is it only 2 individuals, or are they? Oh, no, there's actually several. So we have Bruce, who is Socrates for the night. We have Paul, who is Professor Liberalis, who's a religion professor, at Desperate State University. And then we need several others to volunteer. Now, if you volunteer, keep in mind, there's only a few lines for these others. But who is going to take the role of Paula Postman? Okay, Karen. Okay, we also have Sunshine New Age. And okay. Now you got to be very flaky. Okay, all right. Sophia Seek, who doesn't have much to say at all. Okay, Marguerite. Okay. We have a male student, navel gazer, and who Steve, why don't you be navel gazer? Oh, you don't have it. Okay. Well, John, why don't you be navel gazer? Okay. Again, it's not a major role, not a starring role in the drama or anything. And then we have Chris Christian, who wants to be Chris Christian.
Can.
Oh, okay, Janet. Okay, Janet will be Chris Christian.
Okay.
And that's, by the way, that's a very appropriate role for you. And then we have Thomas Skeptic, and who volunteers. Okay, so Pamela, wait a minute, your name is Thomas? That's the female. Yeah, Thomasina Skeptic. Okay, all right, so that's the lineup. So let's go ahead and begin, except that Socrates has excused himself, I see. And so, but anyway, Paul, Professor Liberalis, come on up, and until Socrates gets here, I'll try to fill in. Here he is. Okay. So, all right, so now, when this is over, we get to vote on who's the better actor. So.
2 hours playing an angel at the empty tomb.
We did the Easter walk.
Get my ancient Greek water here.
Okay. Yep, fine. You got yours highlighted. Okay.
All right, Professor Liberalis.
Ready?
Begin.
Well, now that we've introduced ourselves, I'd like us to discuss the nature of Christ. But first, we better set this in an historical context. And Socrates here lived and died some 400 years BCE, and you're looking pretty good too.
Excuse me, but what is BCE?
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have clarified that. BCE means before the common era.
And I died when?
Well, to be exact, you died in 399 BCE.
And what year is it now?
This is the year 2014. Well, actually, 2023, we'll say, meaning the 2023rd year of the common era.
I see. Well, actually, I don't see. What marks the delineation between before the common era and the common era? Did something monumental occur between BCE and CE?
Well, before the common era refers to the period before Jesus Christ was born. It used to be called before Christ or BC. Likewise, the years after the birth of Christ were designated AD or Anno Domini, Latin for in the year of our Lord. In other words, after Christ. Is that clear?
I suppose so, but you say the terminology used to be before Christ and after Christ, but now it is before the common era and the common era. Yet I take it that the dividing line between BCE and CE is still the same as between BC and AD, and that is the birth of Jesus Christ.
That's correct, but keep in mind that any divisions in history are purely artificial. Time marches on irrespective of how we divide it. BCE and CE are only artificial designations. Now, let's move on.
Oh, one more question, if you don't mind.
All right. Quickie, please.
If you mark all times from the date of Christ, he must be exceedingly important. But when and why did the terms change to before the common era and the common era? Why isn't it still referred to as before Christ and after Christ if the reference point is the birth of Christ?
Okay, I guess that's a fair question. BC and AD were the common terms until the 1980s, when scholars began to realize how unfair and biased it was to force a Christ-centered dating system on the rest of the world. This reflected a westernized, Christocentric bias that was a residual legacy of Western imperialism. And scholars came to realize that it wasn't sufficiently respectful of other cultures that don't have a Christian tradition. We need to be sensitive toward other people's traditions. And given the fact that we live in a world community that is becoming increasingly diverse and multicultural, it was considered politically incorrect to perpetuate the BC and AD dating system.
But you still date all of time from the birth of Christ, correct? You just prefer not to acknowledge it.
Well, I wouldn't put it that way, but yes, that's essentially correct. It would have caused untold problems with historical dating to change the reference point.
And you consider that to be honest?
Well, whether it's honest or not, I don't know. Furthermore, I really don't care. Like I said, any divisions in the flow of history are only artificial, and that goes for the central dividing line in history. What does matter is that we're sensitive to other cultures and their respective traditions.
Then may I ask you,
I thought you said you only had one more question.
oh, I meant one more question at a time. I can't help asking questions. It's the most efficacious way to learn.
All right, proceed.
Thank you. What I want to know is why the traditional dating system was based on the birth of Jesus Christ. People must have regarded him as the most important person in history. Is that right?
Oh, yes, many did.
Why?
Because he taught us to love and he showed us how to live.
So he was a philosopher then,
Oh, yes, and a great one.
and yet there have been other great philosophers since then, correct?
Sure, there have been many.
So why is Jesus considered so much better than the others, to the point that you date all of history around him?
Because of his great teachings.
What did he teach that was so outstanding?
I'm not sure. I'll have to think about that.
Love.
Yeah, love, that's right.
Just love?
Mainly love. That is his supreme accomplishment. As the Beatles sang, all you need is love.
Yes, Paula mentioned that song the other day. I still don't have a clue what it refers to. But more to the point, I keep in mind that I also taught about love, as did my student Plato. In fact, all great philosophers have known that love is the greatest virtue. What makes Jesus different and so much better than all the others who have taught love?
Not sure, man. I'll have to think about it.
He was supposedly more radical than all the other teachers of love.
More radical? In what way?
Well, supposedly he taught that you should love even your enemies.
So did I. By the way, why do you say supposedly? Did he or did he not teach this?
I say supposedly because I don't believe you can trust the sources of the Bible, you know. Virtually all we know of Jesus was written by his followers who were obviously biased. There are no objective secular sources of the life and teachings of Christ.
Oh, I see. That is an issue that needs to be seriously pondered. But for now, since you say the Bible is virtually our only source of information on Jesus, we should focus on what it says about him.
With me, at least for now.
Actually, Socrates, the issue of whether the Bible is true or not is the subject of another course. I'd recommend you sign up for Dr. Reviso's class on deconstructing the Bible.
Deconstructing the Bible? That strikes me as an odd name for a course that should be an objective search for truth. But if I can return to my question, what makes Jesus so special?
He suffered and died for his beliefs.
That is impressive. But remember, so did I.
Okay, then he also gathered disciples and many others around him who believed in him. And over the past 2,000 years, millions of people have continued to believe in him and follow him. He's been enormously influential.
I had many disciples in my day too, and throughout history, I apparently have influenced millions of people's lives.
Well, he also lived what he taught.
So did I, to the best of my ability.
What impresses me about him is that he liberated people from ignorance and superstition and prejudice.
That is impressive. But remember, so did I.
He taught an enlightened form of universal ethics.
Yes, so did I.
He taught a sublime and universalistic, I can't say it, path to union with God.
Depending upon exactly what you mean by that statement, I believe I also did that.
He was a prophet and spoke for God.
So was I. I sense a theme. So were Moses, Isaiah, Ezekiel, John the Baptist, and dozens of other men and women in history.
Socrates, I'm surprised at you. I thought you were more humble than that, but you're sounding insufferably arrogant. Do you actually think you're as great as Jesus Christ?
No, not at all, at least not according to the modest amount I know of him. On the contrary, I assume just the opposite. I would be totally undeserving if all of history were dated around me. All I'm asking is why he was so much greater than me or anyone else. What is it that makes him so distinctive?
I think we told you.
No, you haven't. Everything you've said applies to me. You haven't told me how or why Jesus is greater.
Okay, let me explain. This is the thing about Jesus. Many people believe strange superstitions about him. They believe he was God.
Excuse me?
They believe he was God, God incarnate in human form.
You mean a God?
No, I mean God with a capital G, the creator and sustainer of the universe, the source of all life, the source of all morality.
You're pulling my hair.
Socrates, I think you mean that Dr. Liberalis is pulling your leg. No, that's literally what they believe.
Christians believe that?
Well, historically they do, but many modern Christians seriously question that.
Until now, I had a rather favorable opinion of Christians. They actually believed that this man, Jesus of Nazareth, was the supreme God of the universe?
That's what they believe, or at least that's what the ones who believe in the Jesus of the Bible believe.
And you say that until modern times, this was what Christians traditionally believed?
Yes, but keep in mind, we're more enlightened now.
This is remarkable.
Well, remember, people used to be quite superstitious.
Did Jesus's original followers believe this?
Well, according to the Gospels, yes.
Gospels?
The word literally means the good news, as in the good news of Jesus Christ. There are 4 gospel accounts of Jesus in the New Testament, and collectively they provide nearly all the biographical information we have on the life and teachings of Christ. At least that's what they claim to be. but many of us don't believe.
And what about later philosophers and theologians? Did the wisest of them believe this?
Until modern times, most Western philosophers and theologians believed in the traditional view of Christ. Interestingly, even most of our great scientists believed it too. But remember, this was before the dawn of the Enlightenment.
And what about your holiest, most spiritually minded men and women?
Oh, yes, they were even more unanimous.
Are they still?
Probably, as far as I know. I really don't know too many people like that personally. But you need to know that most professional theologians, such as myself, do not accept the traditional view anymore.
Do all professional theologians reject the traditional view of Christ?
No, there is a minority of extreme fundamentalists who still believe in the old superstitions.
Yes, I've heard that term fundamentalist used often since I've been here. Tell me, do the scholars who believe in the traditional view of Christ call themselves fundamentalists? Or is that your term for them?
Oh, most of them would probably reject the label fundamentalist. They would probably prefer to be called conservative or evangelical.
I see. Now, is the traditional view of Jesus still the official teaching of the Christian churches?
Technically, yes. Historically, all the creeds and confessions upheld the views that Christ was divine, the Son of God, and all the major denominations from Roman Catholic to Baptist agreed on that point. But as I said, many modern Christians and even some major denominations no longer accept the traditional view.
Now, I must ask you again, what about Jesus's immediate followers, the disciples? They knew him personally, correct? They believed he was divine,
Yes,
all of them?
yes, according to the New Testament sources. But you need to know there are other sources that present a different, more human view of Christ.
More human? So the New Testament writings do not present this Jesus as fully human?
Well, yes, he ate and drank and slept and did most everything that normal humans do. But the New Testament writings also claim he was divine, fully human and fully divine, as the early creeds put it. Of course, that's nonsense.
I do not know if it's nonsense or not. I would first want to examine the background and context for such a belief before dismissing it as nonsense. But tell me more about these other sources. Were they also written by eyewitnesses, and were they written as early as the New Testament Gospels?
They are usually referred to as the Gnostic Gospels, and no, they were written at least 100 years or more after Christ. But they could have been based on oral traditions dating back to the time of Christ.
Could have been?
Yes.
Is there any real evidence to support the belief that they were?
Well, nothing specific, but many of us suspect they were.
Suspect?
We have our reasons for believing they were. Remember, you have to keep in mind, we're professional scholars and theologians. We study the Bible and other ancient manuscripts for a living.
But not all biblical scholars hold to your position, correct?
No, I've made it clear that a minority of biblical scholars, the fundamentalists, do not.
So how many of these scholars are there who still believe in the traditional view of Christ? Are there just a few?
Well, actually, there are thousands. Come to think of it, they may not be such a small minority after all. There may be about as many of them as there are of us progressives. It's just, I don't have much contact with them. They're not to be taken seriously.
And are they as well educated as most of you? What do you call yourselves? Progressives?
Well, to be perfectly honest, many of them have the same educational backgrounds and credentials as many of us do.
And didn't you tell me a few minutes ago that most of them would not label themselves fundamentalists?
No, of course not. That term is loaded with negative connotations. But as far as I'm concerned, they are fundamentalists. They're all behind the times. They're all living in the past. They are misleading people.
Misleading people? You mean by teaching the traditional view of Jesus Christ?
By perpetuating myths, old, outdated myths.
So if I may return more directly to the point, all of Jesus's early followers, all of the primary historical sources, and all of the earliest secondary sources are unanimous that he was divine, God incarnate.
I've told you, yes, if we can trust the sources.
Yes, I realize we are keeping an open mind, keeping that an open question for now, but I'm intrigued. What was the source of this belief that Jesus Christ was divine? Who started this rumor?
Well, according to the Gospels, Jesus made that claim for himself.
So in the Gospels, Jesus actually claimed to be divine. That isn't just an interpretation.
It's pretty plain what he said and what he meant. There's little ambiguity there.
What exactly did he say?
Well, he referred to himself as the Son of God. He claimed to be sinless, and he claimed that he would die a sacrificial death to atone for the sins of all humanity. He claimed he would come at the end of time to judge the whole world. He said things like, I and the Father are one. And he who has seen me has seen the Father. And before Abraham was, I am.
That is astonishing.
Really now.
And this man was sane?
Well, yes, no one thinks otherwise. He taught some very coherent and profound things, you know. As the others said a few minutes ago, he was one of the great philosopher teachers in history. No one doubts that.
I do.
You think he was insane?
Oh, no, I seriously doubt that he was merely a great philosopher. In fact, I'm certain he wasn't.
Please continue. You seem to think you know an awful lot about a man you knew so little of a few minutes ago.
I do not know that much about him, at least not yet, but I do know some things based on common sense and logic. Do any of the rest of you believe what Jesus said about himself, that he was divine?
Are you serious? No way.
No.
Oh, wait a minute, that's Thomas Kepler.
Are you serious? No way.
No.
I find that hard to believe.
I think we're all divine. We all experience godness. We all share the collective cosmic consciousness of this universe. It's just that Jesus recognizes divinity and most people do not.
No.
Not sure. I haven't thought through.
Is it me?
Yeah.
Well, I believe God. I believe he was God. I believe what the Bible says about Jesus.
Then only you, Chris, have any basis for believing that Jesus was a true prophet, an enlightened philosopher, an inspired teacher.
What?
Why?
Not fair.
That's judgment.
Please let me explain before you symbolically crucify me as a heretic. Keep in mind that Jesus claimed to be God, and this is what the earliest and presumably the best sources tell us. The Gospels and the rest of the New Testament. This is also what all of his earliest followers believed. And I understand that many of them died a horrible martyr's death rather than deny their belief. Now, if what Jesus said is true, then only Chris is right. Listen, a man who claimed to be the divine Son of God cannot be a wise man, a great philosopher, or a true prophet. Rather, we should dismiss him as either insane or evil.
No one thinks he was insane or evil. We all accept the fact that he was one of the wisest and best men who ever lived. If even a small part of the Gospels are accurate, he was both good and brilliant. There's no reason to believe otherwise.
I think we can all have the same God consciousness that Jesus experienced. We're all spiritual beings having a physical experience.
Sunshine, take it.
I'd like to address Sunshine's comment, but first let me ask you, Thomas, why you would believe the most illogical thing about Jesus? Why would you call someone who claimed to be a good, wise, why would you call someone who claimed to be God a good, wise, and brilliant man?
Socrates, let me jump in here. After all, it is my class, or at least it's supposed to be. Your basic problem is that you're too rigid and too logical about all this. Excuse me for saying it, but you sound terribly simplistic. That's the kind of black and white thinking that's dangerous. You sound like a fundamentalist.
Oh, no. There's that word again. Is there an objective definition for that word, or do you use it only to put down people who disagree with you?
It has an objective definition.
Professor Morales, excuse me, but I must respectfully disagree. I don't believe that something can be too logical. If something's logical, it's right. If it's illogical, it's wrong. I agree that there's a problem in Socrates' analysis, but I don't think it's because he's too logical.
Well, here's the problem. Jesus could have meant many things when he claimed to be divine, if in fact he ever really said it at all.
That is what I've been saying. It's just like when Shirley MacLaine was taking that walk on the beach and it suddenly dawned on her, I'm God. I think Jesus must have had an epiphany like that. You all ought to read her biography out on a limb. It is absolutely transplendent.
The title should have been out of my mind.
Sunshine, that's not exactly what I had in mind.
Well, what would Jesus have meant?
I'm not certain. As you know, there were many concepts of God or the gods in Greco-Roman culture. The ancients were polytheistic, and there were hundreds of gods in circulation.
Yes, I know. You're talking about my generation.
Maybe that's the quick number I ever heard you say, Socrates. You've been listening to the Who?
Who?
Yeah. How come you know the Who but not the Beatles?
Pardon me, but can we get back on track?
Sure, come on.
Pardon me?
I said, sure.
Oh,
Professor, I think I could answer Socrates' question. I don't think it's complicated at all. When Jesus referred to God, he was speaking as a Jew to other Jews in a Jewish cultural context. He obviously meant Yahweh, the God of the Jews. He wasn't speaking in a Greco-Roman context or Hindu context. I assume his listeners knew full well what he meant when he claimed, I and the Father at one. And if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. When he declared, before Abraham was, I am, that was a direct reference to the infinite creator of the universe, not to Zeus or some impersonal cosmic principle such as Brahman.
I agree. So what kind of God was the God of the Jews?
well, you have to read the Bible to know that.
But I thought you don't believe the Bible.
Well, we're talking about two different issues here. I have no problem believing that the Bible accurately relates what the ancient Jews believed about God. I just draw the line at miracles and all that superstitious stuff, like when Jesus walks on water and claims to be the way, the truth, and the life.
Superstitious or supernatural?
What?
You said you didn't believe in all that superstitious stuff. Did you mean superstitious or supernatural?
I don't distinguish between the two. Do you?
Oh, definitely. One is logically plausible while the other is not.
Well, I don't agree, but let's not get off on another tangent.
No, I agree. So how do we gain more clarity into what Jesus meant when he declared himself to be divine?
Through a systematic study of the scriptures, the Hebrew Old Testament, here's a list of books on Jewish religion, Jewish theology, the concept of the Messiah, and other relevant topics. We can use these as our basic sources for discussing these issues.
But these are all recent books.
Yes, they represent the most up-to-date scholarship on the subject.
But shouldn't we establish our foundation before erecting our building? Shouldn't we gather our data before we try and interpret it?
Oh, exegesis before hermeneutics, huh?
Oh, what? I mean, what?
Yes, I know those words. Those are Greek terms. That's precisely what I had in mind. Let's do it methodically and rationally. Let's do exegesis first. Let's examine the text to see what they actually say. Then we can go to hermeneutics, the interpretation and application of the text. Isn't that sensible?
It's time consuming.
But time is a secondary consideration when pursuing such a vital issue as who was Jesus? After all, this is a course on Christology, is it not?
Yes, but I prefer to deal with modern theological interpretations and controversies rather than going over the same old ground time after time.
But you teach primarily for the benefit of your students, not yourself. Isn't that true?
Yeah, sure, but I've studied this material for years. I think I have a lot to say that my students need to hear.
But wouldn't it be better if they had a solid foundation on on which to assess what you say? I'm sure they would appreciate your brilliance on the subject all the more.
I hope you're not being facetious. So what do you propose?
I would like to read the Jewish scriptures. I've never done so, and apparently most of those in this class haven't either. What if what Thomas says is true? We would learn much about the cultural context in which Jesus operated. We would also learn much about the Jewish concept of God, their beliefs about a Messiah, and so on. I don't doubt that each of us would read and interpret his material in accord with his or her own particular views and presuppositions. But shouldn't we at least try to read and interpret the material as objectively and fairly as possible?
What do the rest of you think?
I like the idea. I know I'll never read the Bible unless it's part of a class assignment. I think it should be insightful.
I think Socrates is right. I think we should start with what the Bible says about Judaism.
Yeah, there's some funky stuff in the Bible. I'd like to read it.
Far out. I've read some in the Bible, but not too much. It's sort of like the Quran, isn't it? Hey, would anyone like to borrow my copy of the Aquarian Gospel of Jesus? It's really cool.
That's not exactly on the subject.
That's fine with me. It seems like the right place to start.
That's fine with me. It seems like.
No, that's my fault.
Yeah,
No, go ahead. Better read it. I took her line.
Okay.
that's fine with me. It seems like the right place to start.
I don't know. I have to think about it. I didn't know we were going to read a lot for this course. I heard that mostly all we did was show up. for class and listen to Dr. Liberal's lectures. I'm not really into reading too much. I got a social life, you know.
I'll let that last comment pass. By the way, do you all know what you're in for? The Old Testament is very long, about 2,000 pages in most Bibles.
Ooh, that's long. I don't think I've read 2,000 pages in.
Probably not.
That's a lot to absorb.
Hope there's a lot of pictures.
Reader's Digest condensed version, maybe we should just read that.
I think there are versions on the internet.
You don't have to read the whole Old Testament, just mainly the theological parts.
Okay, let's do it this way. Let's each go our own separate way and read whatever you think would be useful and interesting. You can either read off my reading list or in the Old Testament. If you'd like any suggestions, I'll be glad to direct you.
Shouldn't we all read something in common? Can't we all just read the Old Testament?
I think not. Like I said, it's very long.
But we have a week before the next class. 2,000 pages, that's less than 300 pages a day.
Too much. Keep in mind that students today have a lot to keep up with, including all the demands of social media. But go and read what you will. Your assignment is to be prepared to discuss Jewish religion and Jesus, Jewish background, and especially the Jewish concept of God. I'll see you all here again next week, except perhaps for you, Mr. Gazer.
Is that me? Oh, I wasn't paying attention. Now, I'm definitely gonna have to give this some more serious consideration. See, I was told we weren't going to have to,
Okay, time's up. Class dismissed. Oh, Mr. Gazer, please stop by my office after class. We need to have a chat.
Except for Mr. Gazer, right? I think we're gonna be expelled from the class. Right. So a lot to take in, right? So let me start with Socrates himself and what were your thoughts? What were your thoughts on the most significant points of that not a dialogue, it's a octologue. You know, it's about 8 people, right? So Bruce, pardon me, Socrates, any particular thoughts on that?
I'm sorry, I was reading and reformulating my text.
What did you find particularly meaningful out of that?
The whole thing.
Let's go through it kind of methodically. So he's wondering why we date all of history to this Jew who was executed as a criminal. And what did you think was kind of the main point there?
Well, I mean, it's hard to put yourself in the position of someone who just come back from the dead 2,000 years later. There's plenty of things they talk about that he wouldn't really have had any idea about at all. You know, knows nothing about the history of philosophy, you know, all of these things. But he wants to find out. I think that's the most important thing about it, is he wants to find out. And this was typically what we know from through Plato and so forth. This was his idea, and that he was someone who loved the truth, who wanted to find the truth, and was but felt, and that's what we call the Socratic method, that one of the best ways to teach is through questioning. And we've seen that historically in pedagogy through generations, and even something like we've read Greg Kogel's Tactics, and Greg Kogel says, ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. I like to say, someone says, I don't believe in God, and I say, sit still, I'll give you 3 good arguments for the existence of God. Are you ready? Or I could say, well, what kind of God do you believe in? Right? Which one is going to lead to a conversation? Second one, right? And you can sort of keep it. So Socrates, you can see when they executed him because he was a pest.
Yeah.
He was misleading the youth.
That's right.
just wish we could still
That's right.
people this.
Well, we'd have a serious teacher shortage, if that were the case.
I think that's the most, quite interesting to see. I don't know how these play out with the other ones, but
Mhm.
we're applying his method and his approach to things. It should be really a good way to bring out the important.
But the only reason we care about dialoguing is because it's a pursuit of the truth. It's not to sharpen our intellectual skills and try to outsmart the other person and so on. We only ask questions honestly so as to grow in knowledge and truth. Yeah.
Two things, one general and one personal. Aristotle talked about different levels of friendship, you know, the people you grew up with and people with your family and so forth.
Mhm.
But the highest level of friendship was with people with whom you pursued the truth.
Mhm.
It was that important.
Mhm.
And my youngest daughter, ultimately married one of her colleagues in graduate school in physics at University of Pennsylvania. He has a Turkish background, and so forth, but he was a Christian. I said, so what do you like about him, Dad? And she said, Daddy, he loves the truth. I thought somebody might, at least one of them.
Wow. Yeah. There's another, Paul, yes. And please speak up as loudly as possible for the sake of everybody online.
I think his point about the time delineation of time is that no matter what terminology you use, whether it's the BC and AD or BCE and whether CE common era, if you're talking about dividing time at the same point before and after, something very important must have happened at that time.
Mhm.
That would be that important that you would, all the time would be divided in two parts, whatever terminology you use.
Yes. Well, and the same thing can be said about why we changed in the 1980s. Now, I was teaching at Georgia State and teaching mostly US history, but also world history and so on when I taught undergrads. And all of a sudden the textbooks, it was all CE and BCE. And I suspected at that time that there was an agenda behind that to, as much as possible, marginalize Jesus Christ. And of course, that turned out to be the case. And haven't we seen the results of that over the last 40 years or more? Mhm.
When he was really a gadfly, Socrates, about
Mhm.
when he wasn't gonna let people just touch on something and then leave it alone. As he was gathering information from other people, because that's the only way he could do this, about what people said about Jesus in the Gospels and what Jesus said about himself, then he detected there was something unique about Jesus. At first, he thought all these things were just like him, but then at some point he realized, wait a minute, this is different from me, and he wanted to know what that was.
How could somebody who claimed to be God be held up as, at the very least, the greatest man who ever lived? Makes no sense unless there's some reason to think that he was more than just a mortal man. Yeah. Mhm. Other thoughts on the matter before we move on? Anything else?
Just that argument, I've heard the argument many times, about he didn't never really claim to be God.
Mhm.
And I think that addressed, well, here and other things that to explain it was of the times and of the language and of that culture. They knew exactly what it was saying. And
Mhm.
even if we don't today, we can't understand it as clearly as he was
Mhm.
saying it.
Yeah, well, and those who would claim that the apostolic writers were just putting words in his mouth, how could you actually discern what Jesus actually said and what he didn't say and what was attributed to him? They come from the same sources, the same historical sources. So it would be pretty arrogant to think that you can decide for yourself, well, he did say and do this, but no, he didn't say and do that. Because all it does is reveal your own prejudices. If you don't believe he worked miracles, that's because you conflate the supernatural and the superstitious. To you, they're the same thing. And so on. And the same person who supposedly said, love thy neighbor as thyself, also said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and so on. So, you know, in the case of Thomas Jefferson, Jefferson wanted to make Jesus into one of the great humanistic moral philosophers in history, but he didn't accept the divinity of Christ. In fact, if you ever pick up a copy of the so-called Jefferson Bible, the story of Jesus ends with his burial. There is no resurrection, kind of like the play Godspell, for that matter. But isn't that, I mean, rather presumptuous at least, if not outright arrogant, to think you can determine what he actually said and did and what he did not say and do. That's just your own, it's your own worldview that you're expressing. Yeah, yeah. Right. Bruce?
I mean, we didn't get into this in this dialogue, but, you know, we talked about it briefly last week, that Jesus was introduced some extraordinarily novel perspectives, you know, that had never loving your neighbor yourself and turn the other cheek, and the first will be last, and the strength made perfect in weakness, and all these, some of them were like, but, and they, and about his resurrection, all these sorts of things about being God. And had he just had a 3-year ministry and died, it's incomprehensible that would have changed the course of history, right? Except that he came back, right? And people saw him, and people remembered what he had said. And which is why, you know, we always talk about the 9/11 hijackers. You know, they died believing they were doing the right thing. They didn't know that what they were believing was a lie. But the early church fathers and the apostles all knew that it wasn't a lie because it was real. They died for their beliefs, and that has people do die for beliefs if they know they're true.
That's right.
But if they'd known they were a lie, they wouldn't die for them.
Yeah, that's a good basic point that needs to be emphasized. Other thoughts on this, and then we'll move on.
I have
Other
a thought.
Okay, Janet, and then we'll.
One, as I'm listening to you guys speak, I just remembered, gosh, it's been probably 20 years ago. I would go to Beth Hallel very often on Friday and Saturdays. So it's a Messianic temple. So Rabbi Solomon was in charge. Now his son is the rabbi there. But they're born again Christian believers who are Jews. And to go there and learn Old Testament, to learn, I never understood when Jesus said, I am, to the people, why they wanted to stone him. But when I was at the temple with Jewish people and they share that the I am that Jesus claimed is so sacred, they won't even spell it in the Hebrew language. They won't even speak it. And he was claiming to be divinity. So just, you know, like even going to a Messianic temple and learning the Jewish background helped me understand, oh, no wonder the Jewish people wanted to stone Jesus at that time, because he actually said the one word and he did claim to be divinity and God.
Yeah.
And you weren't even supposed to speak that out loud. And he did. I am. He spoke the same I am like Moses at the burning bush.
Outright blasphemy
Mhm.
to Jews. Yeah. Bill had a comment.
Did Thomas Jefferson not believe in any of the miracles that Jesus performed?
No, not that I'm aware of. He believed that the story of Jesus had been, Jesus was a great man, one of the greatest moral philosophers in history, but his followers tried to exalt him to the level of a deity. And Jefferson didn't believe that at all.
Didn't believe it at all.
Yeah. Jefferson was actually a Unitarian. In fact, his primary religious influence was Joseph Priestley. And Priestley was basically one of the founders of Unitarianism in England. And then he got run out of England literally and came to America. He became a friend of Thomas Jefferson's. So Jefferson is a deist or a Unitarian. And in fact, Jefferson believed that was the only truly rational belief system. Is there a God? Well, of course there's a God. Jefferson believed that. I mean, it's ridiculous and nonsense to think that there's not an eternal creator, an omnipotent creator of the universe. You have to be an absolute fool not to believe that. But the question is that necessarily the God of the Bible? And Jefferson was very skeptical about that. So his view of God was that God created us in his image. See, again, they pick and choose what they want to believe in the Bible, and they want to believe the best about human nature. So they believe that we're created in the image of God, which means that we've been endowed with a rational mind, if we'll use it. We also have a moral conscience, if we'll use it. We have a creative nature, just like God, except obviously restricted. So if you buy into all that, the implication of the deists and the Unitarians would be, okay, if all that's true, we're created in the image of God. We've got within ourselves everything we need to please God and to live the kind of life that we need. And so they were very skeptical of the Bible as being divinely inspired revelation. In their mind, we don't need it. We go on the basis of our own rational thinking and frankly, our own emotions and so on. And that makes perfect sense if there was no fall and if human beings do not have, a sin nature. And Jefferson did not believe that we have a sin nature. No. And by the way, if you don't believe that human beings have a sin nature, how on earth do you account for the horrible things of history? And their argument will be what?
Society.
It's society. It's unjust social and political systems. So we're going to create a better one here in America than has ever existed in the past. So the problem is not me, and the problem is not us, that we have a sin nature. The problem is unjust social and political system, economic systems too, to draw in Karl Marx. But those are all systems developed by human beings. And if we're so good in and of ourselves, how come everything we attempt to do turns out to be a disaster eventually? Makes no sense at all. Yeah.
Now, so Unitarians, they don't believe they need to be born again?
Oh, not at all. No. Furthermore, a Unitarian, I used to take students once a year to a local Unitarian church after we had taught on Unitarianism. And the question that always came up with the students was, why are they praying, by the way? And who or what is it they're praying to? Because if their Unitarian beliefs are correct, there's no reason to pray. God does not intervene in human affairs. We don't need him. All we need to do is follow our own common sense and our own rational capacities and so on. Now, by the way, one more little anecdote and then we'll move on. At the Constitutional Convention in 1787, one of the great so-called founding fathers and one of the most influential was Benjamin Franklin. Now, Benjamin Franklin, like Thomas Jefferson, was a deist, okay? But basically what later becomes Unitarianism. And yet you probably know that in the midst of all the argument going on at the Constitutional Convention, Benjamin Franklin gets up and says, look, we're not making any progress here. And yet we have never prayed and asked for divine guidance on what we're doing. Now, that's oftentimes cited by Christians and, and so on. But they never consider why would Benjamin Franklin say something like that? Because he was a deist. He really didn't believe that God hears our prayers and answers prayers and intervenes in human affairs. So why would he do such a thing? And the reason is deism and Unitarianism are illegitimate religions. And so, of course, there's going to be contradictions in them. Now, with Christianity, the issue is there anything inherent in basic Christianity that's self-contradictory? If so, it's not the truth. I mean, there can still be a lot of truth in Christianity, but we could never say that Christianity is the truth if there are inherent contradictions. But there are inherent contradictions in all other belief systems, by the way. So Benjamin Franklin and his appeal for prayer is a very, very good example of that. You wouldn't expect a deist to say that. Let's see, who was next?
I'm just gonna say.
Oh,
you know, people that
Karen.
say that Jesus was a wise man.
Yes.
They may also have to say then he's also either a liar or a lunatic, because if he was so wise, why did he claim to be Christ? They didn't think he was Christ and they believed he was a wise man. How wise could they really think he was? Because at the end he said, I'm dying for, you know.
Yes.
Did you, I don't know.
Well, and that's, of course, a major point in C.S. Lewis's Mere Christianity and some of his other writings as well. With Jesus Christ, he's either who he claimed to be, the Lord, or else he's a liar, in other words, a very immoral deceiver, or he's crazy.
Right,
But actually, there's that's right. So the other two options, a liar and a lunatic, don't really stand up to even the most superficial analysis. Now, actually, though, there's a fourth option,
He didn't say it.
which is he's a legend. Lord, liar, lunatic, and I don't know why Lewis didn't go on to the fourth one, although he does address the fourth one in some of his writings, and that is Jesus is just a legend. But if you ever encounter somebody who tries to make that argument, that the whole thing is just made up, and in fact, there probably wasn't even a historical Jesus. One of the best refutations of the legend argument is a book that Bart Ehrman wrote several years ago about the historical Jesus. And Bart Ehrman is one of the greatest critics of Christianity and has done, Bart Ehrman, when he would begin his religion classes at UNC, he would ask his class, and they were very popular classes, several hundred students. He would ask, who among you is a Bible-believing Christian? And there would always be a few people at least, raise their hands. And Ehrman would say, well, by the end of this course, you will no longer believe, in the historicity of the Bible and all. But that's the very same person who wrote a brilliant refutation of the legendary argument that just a radical fringe of extreme leftist scholars, so-called scholars, hold to. So here you've got a fierce critic of Christianity who says the legendary argument is just absolute nonsense. And he makes a great point. Yeah. Okay,
I was just
John?
going to add a thing about Bart Ehrman. He started out very fundamental and he went to Moody Bible Institute.
Yeah, he actually identified as an evangelical Christian until he went to Princeton for his master's. And at Princeton, he sat under the teaching of some very liberal professors.
Well, but then Bruce Metzger as well.
Well, yeah, he also, that's a long story, how he got associated with Bruce Metzger. Not exactly Bruce Metzger's most laudable, association. But yeah, it was studying under liberal professors at Princeton Theological Seminary, not Princeton University. Yeah. Let's see, Steve, did you have a comment?
I was gonna say that there's extra biblical testimony of was it Exodus or somebody in Turkey that was doing the persecution, got torturing early Christians, and they confessed they were worshiping Jesus as God. Refused the legend, and also refused that the deity of Christ was added in later. So that's
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, we have plenty of testimony in second, third centuries and so on of Christians that suffer just excruciating torture and persecution.
A letter, that's Pliny the Younger,
Okay,
written to whoever the emperor was, and he was asking for his
Yeah.
advice about how to deal with these.
yeah.
He's saying, I get these people, I torture them,
Mhm.
I ask them these questions, and this is what they say, and I said how he dealt with them, and the response was.
Yeah, that's in the 130s, and he's writing to the Emperor Hadrian. And what do I do with these people? You know, they're very upstanding, decent, honest people, but they hold to this really screwy, outrageous religion. And they don't acknowledge the gods of the Roman Empire. So what do I do with them? And basically Hadrian wrote back and said, don't go out of your way to persecute them because, you know, frankly, they're not causing any problems. But if somebody is accused of being a Christian and you threaten them with the consequences and they refuse to recant, then you need to do the right thing. You need to execute them. But don't go out of your way because, again, they seem to be very decent, upstanding people.
I think Janet has her hand up.
That's apparently not. Okay. Oh, that's me.
Oh,
Me, that's my hand up. Other points, we have just a few minutes left here. Anything else? Steve, okay.
Yeah, left field. Yeah.
Oh, well, all right.
Get to your objective. The Bible says every knee will bow. That means people aren't aware of it, but every one of us has his truth in us because we're all from his spirit, you know? And when you come into his presence, if you've accepted him as Lord and help him, then you're fine. But other than that, you're gonna burn, you know, because that's his righteousness is what the story, the sins of the world he took into himself.
Okay.
To give us a new thing.
Okay. Another point that comes out in this dialogue, when Socrates is saying basically, well, what is so special about Jesus Christ to where he's the center point of all history? I mean, I taught great moral truths and so on, and others have as well. And the comment is made by Christian that, well, by the way, Jesus also lived what he taught, lived consistently what he taught. Now that does put him in a special category, okay? In other words, unlike us, he was consistent. And we are all, you know, basically to some degree or another, we are all hypocritical in certain respects, where we don't always live consistently with what we proclaim that we believe. With Jesus, he actually consistently lived what he taught. Then the professor, of course, wants to bring up the fact, okay, well, people used to believe all this stuff, but we're more enlightened now. Now, that fits in very, very well with the whole naturalistic evolutionary thesis, and that is, there's nothing particularly special about human beings. We have no soul. We're just the most highly evolved animal forms in the world. And by the way, what we call human beings, we're all just part of a transitional species. In other words, in another 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 years, we'll be different than we are now. And that's all true if evolution were true. But it's not true. And there's plenty of reason to strenuously oppose that line of thought. But if we are in fact just part of a transitional species, then what we are today will be much different and supposedly smarter and I guess even physically, you know, superior thousands of years from now than we are presently. All right, any other thoughts on, oh, Bill, you're questioning?
No.
I think that was the point, the enlightenment, that it's kind of that general consensus is that we're smarter now than all
Oh,
those
yeah,
people before.
sure.
You know, we know so much more than they do, and they
Yeah.
were so ignorant and didn't know
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah,
So
I mean,
that's that arrogance.
I know, they didn't even have baseball. They didn't even, you know, Neanderthals, you know, so anyway. Well, you're right, they did have the Olympics, okay. All right, but, all right, you're trying to complicate my point I'm trying to make here. All right, so any other thoughts on that dialogue? Thank you, those of you who led us through and for your contributions or lack of contributions, which was the case for people like Sunshine New Age, for instance. You did not help, by the way. What's that?
I'm involved, though.
That's right. That's right. So, all right, well, very good. Thank you. And I think if you go back through that and the previous two dialogues as well, and just kind of go through it systematically and more slowly, there's so much in there that I think is paramount to having a well-developed Christian apologetic, being able to explain and defend why we take our faith with utmost seriousness. So, those of you online, anything before we close things out? Thank you for joining us. Janet, thanks for your contribution.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Well, blessings on the rest of your week, and let's be much in prayer for those people up in Nashville who were victims and their families were victimized. And oh my, I can't imagine how excruciating. As you saw the photo that we passed around, I mean, that pastor and his 4 children and that precious little girl, she was one who was murdered the other day, and others as well. So anyway, again, and I can't imagine anything much more inspiring over the next 2 weeks as we approach Resurrection Sunday than going back through Revelation, but don't read it in a scholarly sense so much as read it like a novel. And what an incredibly beautiful story it is. And, so, well, thanks. Good being with you all.
I just wanted to mention one thing.